Hello, and welcome to One Voice Live, where we talk about One Voice, what it is, and how it fits into the world of singing. I am your host, Alex Zito, and I am joined today for the first time by certified One Voice coach, Jackson Perrin.
Whoa, that's me.
I'm so excited for this conversation and just for Jackson Perrin's existence in general. So today we are continuing with a series we are doing called Changing Our Vocal Perspective. What we're exploring in this series is how one voice is changing what we think we know to be true about singing. So our topic for today is the idea of female training female, male training male, and the importance of that or lack thereof. And before we even dive into this conversation, I just want to take a quick second to talk about gender. I think I speak for both of us, Jackson, when I say we acknowledge the fluidity of gender identification and presentation. And as a society, we are just now skimming the surface of what that looks like and the nuance of that and getting rid of gender norms, which is all just incredible. The world of singing, not so much. It's still very much what is required of a man is what's required of a man, what's required of a woman is black and white. And man is man, woman is woman. There's not much nuance yet. I just wanted to address this to say, while we're discussing this idea today, it will be very much in the old way of thinking, male, female, gender. So anything I missed there, Jackson, that you want to include?
No, sounds great. That's awesome.
Yes. Okay, great. So my first question for you, Jackson, is pre-One Voice, what did you look for in a teacher?
You know, honestly, where I grew up in Houston, Texas, shout out H-Town, but not even really downtown Houston, really like the outskirts of that area. There were very limited amount of teachers. Totally. So honestly, I was just looking for a recommendation of someone that they felt they trusted. Whether it was a man or a woman really didn't matter to me as much as it did like the word of somebody I trusted. I was kind of holding on to that.
Yeah, totally. So as you said, gender didn't really matter to you. Did you have anyone around you who felt differently?
I mean, with anything, particularly with singing, especially growing up within it, there was always these contradicting views, particularly with like someone whose voice is changing. You had a lot of people going, oh, well, you want to make sure that he's put with another guy who understands that stuff. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, you'd be like, oh, you probably want to have him be with a girl who understands that stuff. So conflicting views, conflicting ideologies that were kind of like mixed and thrown at like my 12-year-old freaking out self.
Someone who would say, oh, I have to have a teacher who's a female as a female. Why do you think it is that they believe that? What might be going through their minds?
You know, I think most of the time they would want to make sure that that person is being taught by someone who's experienced similar sensations or similar experiences, whether that being performance or whether that being in practice. I think that's just a broad scope answer I could give. I can't really speak on the count of other people's experiences because being a guy myself.
And this is another really interesting idea. You think if they can do it, they can teach it. So it's like, oh, if I hear someone sing Elphaba the way I want to sing it, well, then they can teach me how to do it.
Absolutely.
Which is not necessarily true. And there are people who can't do it, in my experience, who can teach it. There are things that I can't do necessarily 8 shows a week that I know I can teach someone else to do really, really well, just because that's not where I'm focusing my time in a vocal practice. So Jackson, in your opinion, how is One Voice changing the idea that we need to be taught by the same gender as we are?
I mean, it kind of goes back to, I guess, like my original answer, which is people want to make sure that your sensations that you're experiencing are similar to mine as well. But I guess One Voice is kind of proven with, not to get too deep into theory, with coordination theory or and also resonance theory, that things do vibrate, certain pitches vibrate in a certain place in our body. For women, that is a different place than for most men. And with that in mind, we're able to still teach like, hey, this note from the data that we've collected will vibrate in your voice here, where this note in my voice will vibrate in this place. So I guess in a lot of ways, we're changing the fact that just because we're different in terms of gender or sex, doesn't mean that we don't have experience with how those things vibrate or where they vibrate in our body and how it feels to be feeling those sensations. Whereas before, I would think it was very much like, you're going to feel something very different than I am. We're proving that just because we do experience different things on certain notes differently, that doesn't mean that we can't adjust and look at a keyboard or a note or a pitch and understand that how to translate that for a different person that is of a different gender or sex.
Absolutely. So just to clarify, you're saying because of the information we have and the way we're identifying the voice, that it really doesn't vary from male to female as long as you understand the original theories of coordinations.
Bingo, exactly.
Amazing. Were you ever nervous the first time you had to teach a female singer?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, to be completely honest, still at that time, I've been teaching now for 5 years. At that time, that theory of coordinations, it was still, even though I had been taking sessions for about a couple of years, it was still pretty fresh. And to really understand and really change my point of view perspective of that took a couple of years of teaching as well as training on with those ideas and thought processes.
Totally. Would you say you were more nervous training a woman than a male, or were you just nervous to teach anyone?
Just nervous in general, but when it came to teaching a girl versus a male, particularly a girl, I'm just really careful to make sure that what she was experiencing, how to translate it in my own experience, would take time. So I was a little bit nervous that I would have like a lag, for better words, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's me too. It would be that extra 5 seconds trying to figure out, oh crap, what is you're a dude. Do you think there's ever a case where having a same gender teacher is important or an asset?
No, I mean, once again, I just go back to like a voice changing. That's the best scenario I could imagine that. But more importantly than anything in those moments, I feel like empathy and understanding like where the person's coming from and being patient and guiding them with as much positivity as possible. What could come from easily a man or a woman as well. Particularly when you have these ideas of coordination theory in mind, knowing that that's going to shift for a young man who's going through puberty or adolescence, that you have the tools that you need in order to guide someone through it.
Yeah, and I was thinking about this because I love when I get a student who wants to work on a legit soprano song. It just excites me just because that's how I started out mostly, was singing in choir and legit soprano. And I was thinking, is that an asset for me to teach a female who's working on that? Like, would I be better at that than, say, you, Jackson? And I really had to think about it for a second. And I don't think it comes down to gender, but I think it comes down more to skill. First of all, understanding of the voice, but then also what have we worked on in our own voices. I think I do have something special to offer to legit sopranos because of my own experience singing that. But if I had a female student come to me who wanted to work on false folds, which for those of you who don't know, false folds are a separate set of folds that you can engage to create a super gritty sound without hurting yourself. It's how a lot of rock singers create that really rough sound that you're like, you're bleeding on the inside, but they're not. If I had a female student who was like, I really want to work on my false folds, I would be like, Jackson Perrin, doesn't matter that you're a guy. It matters that you have so much experience doing that. I don't know at this point yet how to guide a student to engage their false folds because I haven't played around with it enough myself. So Absolutely. I think it's way more skill based than it is gender based.
It's yeah, I guess you're right. It's a great point as well. It almost comes down to what your preference is as a singer, and with that, because of those preference and things that you tend to like more, you develop an experience around that, and you dive deeper, and because of that, you get more skills in that area as well. That makes sense. That's kind of what Completely. I'm hearing. So it has nothing to do with being male, female. It has more to do with what your tastes are in music, and because of that, how that inspires you to keep learning in that style. And while simultaneously using all these tools that we know from One Voice.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think that becomes more nuanced when it comes into style. But again, as far as hitting notes you want to hit and hitting them in the way you want to hit them, as far as belting or head voice in old terms or heavyweight, lightweight in One Voice terms, I think it doesn't matter at all as long as you look at the voice in the way we're looking at it. With the coordination theory and weight theory, it's boom, it's there. And then, of course, as you get into style, if I had a consultation with a songwriter who was like, yeah, I really want to like work on my rock sound, I'd be like, great, I could help you. But also Jackson Perrin exists, and like that might be better for you. Is there anything else you want to add to this conversation before we wrap it up?
You know, I don't really, it's actually, before we even talked today, we had the conversation of like what this topic was going to be about. And I already told you that I don't have too many thoughts around this idea, to be completely honest, because I never saw it from that perspective. Especially I have the privilege of being and kind of immersing myself in the world of One Voice for the last couple of years, that I hadn't even thought of why that would become an issue. simply because I had gotten in the thought process of like, oh, of course I can just shift things over. But 5 years ago, I was freaking out about it. So it was a good call about that too.
I feel totally similarly in the sense of this whole changing your vocal perspective conversation and series that we've done. We've been in the One Voice world for teaching for 5 years, but longer than that, just learning about it. So even talking about like what is the right way to sing, being defined by your vocal range. I am so on the other side of those things that it feels so difficult to even step back into the old way of thinking. So I totally understand what you're saying because we're so immersed. Like once your perspective has changed, it's so interesting to have to go back for a second and like to dip back into that world. Yeah, totally fascinating. Jackson, amazing. So this leads us to our very first question segment of the show of One Voice Live. And this is where we answer questions that have been emailed into us from One Voicers like you. And so our first question is from James, and he asks, what is a vocal tract and how do you shape it? Which is an excellent question, James. Thank you so much for sending this in. So the first thing I always get asked about vocal tract is it vocal track or tract? And it is vocal tract with a T. And what that is it's everything past your larynx, up into the tip of your nose and up into the tip of your mouth. And this area is something you can shape to create different sounds. So, for example, a very short vocal tract, you literally just shorten it, sounds very close to a SpongeBob-like voice. And the longer you go, the more it sounds like Patrick. So, for example, hey, what's up? This is a really, really short vocal tract, and I sound kind of like SpongeBob. And then as I elongate more and more and more, hey, SpongeBob, I'm Patrick, it sounds more like Patrick. Where does vocal tract come in handy? Great question. I'm glad you asked. Vocal tract comes in handy when you're dipping into different styles. So if I'm going to sing something legit, soprano, If I Loved You from Carousel, Jackson, SpongeBob or Patrick, where do you think I'm going to lean?
Definitely more Patrick.
More Patrick, yes. Okay, great. Because if I'm singing, If I Loved You Time and Again, okay. If I'm like in the Lollipop Guild, that sounds great. But if I'm trying to like sing as a legit soprano and I want more of a classical sound, I'm just going to add a little bit of space. So if I loved you time and again. The only thing I changed, I didn't change weight. I didn't change how much vibrato I used. I only changed how much space was in my vocal tract. And the same thing for if I was going to sing Gimme Gimme from Thoroughly Modern Millie. Typically, you wouldn't hear someone with a longer vocal tract saying, gimme, gimme, that thing called love. Doesn't quite match the Broadway pingy sound we want. So, gimme, gimme, that thing called love is a little bit more in the style, a little bit more Sutton Foster. Vocal tract shaping also comes in really handy when you're trying to do impressions. People who are great at impressions, you can hear them. They just have such an understanding of how to shape their vocal tract. So this is where vocal tract can come in handy. Now, how do you practice this? So the first thing I would do is speak in a SpongeBob voice. Hey, what's up? So you can kind of feel what this feels like, and then go to a Patrick and say, oh, okay, what do I feel changing? And see if you can go between the two. And then I would put that into singing. So, hey, I'm SpongeBob. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch. And start to feel what it feels like to manipulate this, to manipulate your shaping as you're singing. Jackson, any thoughts on this?
I think you knocked it out of the park, personally. Now, I have a question for you, actually, going off of everything you said. Do you feel that you can change the vocal tract in the back shaping versus the front? And how would that affect the sound?
That's a great question. Can definitely change in the back. If you noticed, my mouth didn't really move. So from doing like SpongeBob all the way to Patrick, first of all, that's the same range of notes, which kind of boggles people's minds sometimes. I'm literally speaking in the same pitch range. It just sounds totally different. But what you can see is my mouth isn't changing at all. Everything's happening in the back here. You absolutely can change stuff up front, but it doesn't really affect as much as the stuff in the back. Yeah, that's a really, really great point to clarify, for sure. So yeah, I can give as much space up here as I want, but if I'm shortened in the back, it's going to sound short. I look and
Exactly.
sound insane.
Out of context, of course.
Can you imagine someone who like wasn't a singer was just like, oh, I want to watch this for a second, and then I was like, like, what are you doing? That's amazing. Great. Anything else about the vocal tract, Jackson, that you think is important?
No, the only reason I wanted to highlight that point is because a lot of times I find in conventional ways of singing, depending on the music director or choir teacher you're working with, they always want you to elongate the front of your track or make it larger, but it doesn't really change the tone or the style. And that goes right back around to what you just said, the whole tangent, which is that it needs to change the track in the back, not necessarily the front. And those are the things that change the actual tone and style in space.
So many choir teachers, drop your jaw. Okay. And
Bingo.
maybe there might be some people that they do that and automatically it drops in the back too. And it opens and elongates and that works for them. And then there are going to be other people that stay short in the back, drop the jaw, and it doesn't work. And this is, oh my gosh, this is the importance of understanding what's happening and having a common language, which is actually our topic next week, which I'm so excited about. Okay, great. James, thank you so much for your question. Next week, I'm going to be joined by Michael Maresca again, father of One Voice, creator of One Voice. And we're going to be I tried to glide over that and I couldn't. And we're going to be talking about the importance of a common language when it comes to singing. Is one of my favorite conversations ever. Same time, same place, you guys. Wednesday on Instagram, 1:30 CT. We'll see you there. Jackson, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. This was an absolute blast, and I adore you.
Thank you for having me.